Okay, so now I'm going to invite Chris back to the stage with Giulio QUAGGIOTTO, I can say your name, from the UNDP, who are going to talk about what next for labs.
Is this your good side? You know, you sit there. So, Giulio? So I'm actually going to interview one of the most interesting people I know, and he's very hard to catch because he is from Italy originally, but I've never met him in Italy. And since then that I've known him, I think he's lived in London, Japan, Dubai, Amsterdam, but then he didn't come to visit me. And then, yeah, he forgot that I was from Amsterdam. And now he's living in Thailand. And he's always someone, and it's not for nothing that organizations, he's now working at with the UNDP, that they ask him, because he's always someone who's like on the forefront. So he's been working in the field of social innovation, but actually I think he's already in another field. He's always doing things that are for tomorrow. So the first question, I can't catch him, is that I want, yeah, he said I could introduce him. So the first question is, what the hell are you doing, Giulio? And tell me a little bit about all these places you've been.
Okay, so if you want, I don't know if it's visible, but I'm blushing. I'm purple inside, so if you wanted to embarrass me, you succeeded. Well, you know, one way to describe what I do is that I have an insane passion for dysfunctional bureaucracies. And that's a bit of a reason why I work for the UN. By the way, that's not a very good pickup line if you wanted to use it. Doesn't really work very well. But I'm actually, on a serious note, I'm genuinely interested in the question of how human beings have created systems that are supposed to generate good and often ended up doing very different things than what they were originally supposed to do. And the reason why I'm interested in that topic is that I think, A, it's how these patterns created, right? So how do organizations set themselves up to end up doing something different from what they were originated? It's a very interesting question. And second, the pain that this creates is not only the pain felt by citizens, it's a pain felt inside the bureaucracies. There is lots of deep pain by people who were originally wanted to do the right thing, and like, you know, Mephistopheles in Faust says, you know, I end up doing the opposite, right? I end up only doing the evil. So I'm fascinated by that question, and I keep exploring different.
It's a little bit what Carolyn said this morning. You go in and you think you're going to help families, and at a certain point you're feeling I'm part of a system and I'm not helping families. I'm from the child removal system, as you said. So yes. And you like that kind of stuff.
Yes, which just makes, I'm the last person you want to be stuck in the elevator with, because I can tell you stories about dysfunction endlessly. But you know, the thing that is really interesting, of course, is the moment when you're able to reconnect the organization with its original purpose, then the level of energy that you unleash is tremendous. And so if you're actually, you know, some of the projects that I'm mostly proud of is exactly when you are able to reconnect, right? So, and say, okay, you are here to create this. Let's go back to this particular purpose, and then all of a sudden you are able to generate new energies. And you know, in the UN,
tell me?
yes,
Can
I'll
you
give
tell
an
me
example.
one of these
right.
examples where
so
you were proud
at the moment,
of?
you know, so I set up the first innovation unit inside UNDP in Long Life. And at the time, you know, my welcome to the organization was people saying, why do we need one like you around here, right? And at the moment, we are launching 10 labs across this region. And if
in
you had told
Asia.
me, yes, in Asia, and 60 around the world. And if you had told me this 1 year ago, I would have told you, ooh. And it's happening, right? And it's happening fundamentally because the organization and the world that we're working in is realizing that the trajectory under which most of the world is at the moment is just not fast enough and the right one to get to the objectives that we want to achieve in terms of development. And getting the organization to accept that the price to pay to not be fast enough in the, with the world is irrelevance, right? But that is ultimately what is happening, right? Because, you know, it's not that when I say I work for the UN, most people think, really? Innovation, you? Honestly, right? And so increasingly then, if you look at the debates that are happening around the world, that irrelevance is a price that you have to pay if you don't keep up with the pace of what is happening outside. But being able actually to act against it and create the energy to generate a different type of discussion, that is interesting.
So, to get it concrete, at the moment you are in Thailand and
Yes.
you're setting up these labs in the region. And what are these labs set out to do?
They're mostly about having a conversation with governments around the question of, are you in the right trajectory when it comes to development? And as we know, whether it is developing or developed countries, most governments at the moment, unfortunately, have a negative answer to that question. The question is, if you really want to take this seriously, and you're not taking things like the Sustainable Development Goals simply as a target, but you really want to do it, that basically means organizing yourself very differently, organizing the financing, the structure, what you're doing in a very different type of way. And so the labs are basically a seed investment from us to have a conversation with governments and say, do you really want to accelerate? And if you do, business as usual, the way you're structured as you are now, the way you're thinking about the problems, as we heard this morning throughout, is just not fit anymore with the type of challenges that you have around you. Right? As one of our friends like to say, we're trying to fix 21st century problems with 19th century institutions. Do we want to have that conversation for real? And if we do, what do we do about it? And these labs are basically a place to start showing how do you organize yourself differently to solve this type of problems. Which means that probably, organizing yourself around ministries doesn't work anymore. Organizing yourself with the way public finance is done at the moment is not working anymore. Procurement is not working, endlessly, the places where you want to start. But if you want to have that type of acceleration for real, these are the type of things that you need to start tackling. So this is the conversation we are starting to have in the region.
So, because one of the discussions also, for example, with the social labs in Hong Kong is also what is actually what should the outcome be?
Yes.
Why are we doing all this innovation and experimentation? I think you're saying something about that, but could you perhaps elaborate a little bit more? Why are we doing all this? It's in order not to get irrelevant, or because...
Yes, there is a little bit of that. There is irrelevance and coherence with the problem you're trying to solve. And there's also something else. Can we pull out my slide? And the only one thing that I prepared. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So this is how I like to explain. I actually used this last week with the Thai government, so colleagues from Thailand, please don't hate me too much. This is our 3 different heart readings. And 2 of these hearts, so 1 heart is healthy, and 2 are unhealthy. Can someone tell me, or if there is a doctor can tell me, so do you think, who thinks that number A is healthy? Or letter A is healthy?
Raise your hand if you think number A is the healthy person.
No, right or wrong, okay. B?
Raise your hand if number B is the healthy person.
Okay, and C?
It's a trick, yeah.
Okay,
C.
wonderful, okay, there's no trick, okay, there's way too many B and C, so, okay.
You have some cowards who don't put up their hand.
Right. So, it's actually B. And the reason being is that a healthy heart is one that adapts and is agile enough, elastic enough to adapt to changing circumstances around it. Yeah? So it's flexible enough it actually can do it. Now, the heart does that biologically. Institutions need to take decisions to do things differently. Right? So there's somewhere, somehow, needs to say, because I did this yesterday, because I did the lab, tomorrow I'm going to do something differently. And that decision, and that patterns of decisions inside the organization at the moment is what is broken. Because governments are designed mostly for accountability, but not for learning. Right? And so people actually don't say, I learned this, and therefore I'm going to do something differently tomorrow, which means the world around keeps changing, but the heartbeat is an unhealthy one. And to me, this is actually when now I start asking this question much more systematically about who takes the decisions to do things differently. How do we get to a pattern where whether you're at the top or at the bottom of a bureaucracy, you are comfortable taking the decision, but because you learn something new, because you try this out, because you did that prototype, tomorrow you do something differently. And that is not an easy conversation to have.
But this is quite confusing because normally when you talk about innovation, you would think that the outcome of innovation is a new thing, a product or a technology or a prototype. But you're actually saying innovation is there in order to be able to learn.
Yes, and well, you know, I actually
Why
always
do you
resisted
use
the definition of innovation, but the one I'm liking at the moment is innovation is providing a system with renewal capacity, right? So it's actually providing an organization, a government, a UN, with the ability to renew itself. So I'm very focused on institutional innovation, admittedly, but that is the actual, and again, what does actually mean practically is that people are taking different patterns of decisions over time. And how do we make it happen? That's a question that intrigues me.
It's almost like an immune system. Like you don't know what's coming, but if your immune system is healthy, you know how to react.
Exactly.
So it's like you would like a government or a society to act like that.
Yes, it's asking the question of who are you, what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and are the things that the world changing around you, what is relevant for you, and are the things that you're doing coherent with the problems you're trying to solve. So unfortunately at the moment, whether it's UN, government, or whatever, we're very focused on single point solutions, right? So every problem looks like a blockchain, every entrepreneurial issue looks like an accelerator, every type of, right? So there seems to be a pattern that locks us into certain type of solutions, which means we don't explore the non-obvious solutions and the difficult ones. I think Caroline was talking about portfolio, right? So of different interventions that are the only coherent fit with the incredibly complex issues we're trying to solve. We are not going to fix climate change with a unicorn, right? And so we need to figure out a different way of thinking about this and provide us, governments, civil society, with different tools to manage that level of complexity.
Okay, so which tools or what do you think will help in order to create this? So we've been talking all day, you've been hearing also a lot of things about, you know, design thinking skills for public officials, creating bridges. Someone just said we need empathy between the people that work in government and the citizens. We need, instead of a complaint line, we need a suggestion line. What, in your view, and based on your experiences working with so many dysfunctional governments and organizations, could help, and what would you want to give to Hong Kong as advice? Like, how can Hong Kong government and the society be more learning, as you said?
Well, you know, first of all, I'm not the right person to give advice. If anything, we have to learn from Hong Kong, right? So given what we've seen just in the last day, what I learned of what has happened here. But if there is one thing which I'm really interested in at the moment is to find a place, and I would love for Hong Kong to be one of these places, where organizations are able to manage a series of interventions at the same time and to find financial tools. So this is your idea of a social R&D infrastructure, right? Financial tools that are able to support that type of complex interventions. Because again, there is lots of fixation with quick fixes, right? And so if you look at what Scotland has done recently, which is launching a bank, which is a mission-oriented bank, to actually mobilize finance for these big, complex, interrelated issues and at system-level type of interventions. That's a very different type of financing instrument, right? Why not in Hong Kong? Why not have this level of ambition to take more, you know, from the social labs on, right? You created a fertile ground to start a discussion about, you know, what you have in your report, you know, a true social R&D infrastructure. Why only have banks and for hardcore infrastructure? Why not have a bank for social R&D infrastructure, right? This would be, I think,
a social bank.
Yes.
So we have, which is part of the social R&D structure.
Totally. Why not? In the region, it would be fantastic to have one.
Okay, another one. That's one. Write down, guys. Social bank. Good in Hong Kong. I see this big building in the center, and it's all the banks, and then the social bank.
Yeah, and so, you know, for my, what I'm itching to do, of course, but this is because of where I'm working, is to find places that are really willing to do bold experiments around the topic of inequality, right?
Inequality.
Inequality,
yeah.
yes. And that, again, is a kind of thing where you're not going to solve us by having 10 accelerators and 50 things, et cetera, et cetera. We need to start talking about really complex interventions, right? We need to look at many of the things that we talk about here, but all at once.
But that sounds very top-down, Because then you almost say, okay, there needs to be someone who makes a decision, who says, we're going to make a program, and a big one, and we're going to focus on this, and we're going to do it like that.
I think the vision, if you want, is to say, coalesce around something which is like fighting inequality, and what actually intervention looks like. It's certainly not something that you can do from the top. Again, by the nature of working in something complex, nobody can actually know the solution up front, right?
But you do say there should be kind of a focus
Learning
of a
process
vision,
around it, yes.
and that should be done on a top-down level.
Yeah, I think at the moment we are missing bold visions around some of these topics, and certainly we are missing it within the UN system, right?
Bold visions.
Yes, but it's practically it means one of my ideas is again creating ministry of possibilities, right? Associating to bureaucracies things like possibility, imagination, all these type of things that we are not used to think about it, right? So when I do sessions with government officials, I ask them, when is the last time your boss has asked you to be imaginative?
To be?
Imaginative.
Imaginative.
Right? Would your colleagues think that the place where you work is a place of possibilities? Right? And this is where the pain comes out, right? Because literally everybody is suffering from this. They want to do the right thing, right? We all want to do. In the UN, it's the same thing. But. So if you really want to tackle that, what do we do?
And this Ministry of Possibilities, which sounds beautiful, is it, would you say this would be set up within government? Or is it this 1 foot out of government, 1 foot in government? Or is it a new type of government outside of government? Where can we? I really want to start.
I'd love to give a general recipe because I think it will be so context specific, right? Depending on the country, the context, etc. I do think there is something about just creating that space that says there is, right? So it can be, if you have a right type of setup, it can be sponsored inside government, but it could be something completely different, right?
Yes.
So, but I think that it's a moment of creating and coalesce the energy around the fact that it is possible to create new forms of public value.
Yeah, and what you say then, and I'm going to conclude also this interview because we are liking it, but I'm not sure if, I think I see a lot of interested faces, but that it also starts with a space, and for me, when I was researching the social labs, I also found it hard to grasp what is it. And in the report, I think I concluded by saying it's a safe space for experimentation. And that we're in need of spaces like this. And this is perhaps still a small space. But how could you make this space bigger, perhaps even better financed even, but also with a more ambitious program dealing with some of the most crucial topics like inequality? And that it's but it's still a space which I think the social labs also have, where you can think creative, you can think out of the box, you can be imaginative, and you can make mistakes, and where different partners all together kind of come together.
Yes, I'll give you one final example since you asked me, and this came to mind. So the last place I would ask you to go to for good public sector is Italy, okay? But there is one example that I just will make very briefly. Since we talked also about how you get ideas from citizens. So what happened in the city of Bologna is that graffiti came up all over town, and a bunch of citizens go to a town hall with brushes and things and say, we want to clean it. What does the government say? No. We cannot procure you. If you actually clean and fall from the stairs, God, this is our risk. We cannot allow you to do this, right? This was the initial reaction. Now, fast forward 2 years down the line, when I talk about possibilities, Bologna has created a new instrument which is called Citizen Municipality Collaboration, PACTs. There's now 400 of them on topics that the citizens care about. The local government says, look, I cannot intervene because I don't have the money, etc., but I acknowledge that you care about this and I'll let you do this, right? And we create a new form, all right, of actually working between the municipality and citizens. What does that look like for the next generation of social labs here, right? Could you have new forms of collaboration created out of the experiment that you did? I think that would be super interesting to explore.
And so good that they actually built a structure
Yes,
in order to facilitate it now.
Decision point, right?
And now it's not only about graffiti, but now it can be all sorts of other topics.
Exactly. The decision was taken to do things differently.
And so that keeps you vital and flexible. Giulio, thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
Okay, we've come to the final 8 minutes. First of all, you know, I was supposed to respond to Chris's report, but I'm glad, you know, we didn't have the chance just now because with the open space and with Giulio's inspirations, I think no matter where we come from, there really should be a bureau or a ministry for possibilities. 得唔得啊？我有個政策局咧係叫做可能性，乜都有可能嘅政策局，得唔得啊？乜都有可能。I think this is like you know, really out of the box thinking. Because nowadays, each bureau, I mean, it doesn't really matter whether you're in China or Thailand, you know, every bureau has a portfolio. But what if we have a bureau with no portfolio and say, come to us. If you have an idea, come to us. If there's a possibility, and we'll see how we can make it happen. I think that's really wonderful. And I think there's no better way to conclude it. But let me just spend a few minutes to reflect on what happened today, okay? We heard from the 4 speakers and really have to thank them because they are super busy people and they flew all the way from New York and from Adelaide and from Paris and from Bangkok and from Amsterdam and from, well, a bit closer to from Kuala Lumpur. To enlighten us and to enlighten us and to give us possibilities. Just starting from the closest, I think Suriani's idea of city, just called city makers. I think that's a wonderful idea. And how she describes it is that it's a platform. It's a platform where young people can voice out, can give their voice. And I think this is actually the intention, and it's still the underlying heart, the chorsum of Social Lab, is to give young people a voice, because young people have lots of interesting ideas, the futures for them, but most often they are not heard. So that is the chorsum, you know, that is the original intent of the Social Lab, and Suriani reminded me, and also hopefully reminded all of you, that we need young change makers in every single city. And then for Stefan, you talked about the cigarette butts, right? You were the one who talked about the cigarette butts, or yeah, Stefan. Yeah, you forgot about that slide. And to me, I work in Admiralty, and every time I walk between Admiralty Center to Pacific Place, you know, you see so many people smoking, and then they just dump their cigarette butts everywhere on the floor. And apparently, you know, in Paris or in France, they spend lots of money because a lot of the smokers, they just pollute the water, and they pollute the air. And you can actually do a lab with it to get the cross-department civil servants. So, I mean, my takeaway is that social labs can start from something very small, from how to treat cigarette butts that are still burning. We call it 打邊爐, right? And that is, I think that's the beauty of co-creation, and that's the beauty of cross-sector labs. And then, Chris, I want to go last, and Chelsea, I really admire your work, you know, doing homelessness and thinking about mental health, because these are very important issues for Hong Kong as well. We have our share of a homeless population, but we haven't got a very comprehensive understanding of who to support them. I mean, we do have the district council doing a little bit, and then we have Home Affairs doing a little bit, but then there's no holistic vision. And you also reminded me that perhaps we should do a lab on homelessness, but we should get a number of departments involved to see what we can do. And Carolyn, your focus on families have really fascinated me from the start. From the first, I know you. I remember going to Adelaide, and you had a display, an exhibition on family by family. You know, the big project you do, and I think family is the nucleus of society. And recently, because the Jockey Club was also interested, I got the opportunity to do a workshop to understand foster care, to understand residential care. And I realized that the model that we use has been like a 1980s model. It's quite broken. It's still about removing children, still about putting them in homes. So this is, I think, a big opportunity. I hope that you can also talk to more people in the next 2 days. And so we can all think about a different method, because a child is a child is not a number, a child is to be protected. So, foster care is about 4,000 young children, as far as I remember. It's not a very big number, but it's still a very important number. So I really thank all the speakers from really sharing and their insights. And finally to Chris, I learned about Social Lab because of the Netherlands and because of Kennisland. And then a few years later, I asked Chris back, and she became our evaluator. You will say, what is this? You learn from her, and she's going to evaluate you. Will she be fair? Will she be open? And, she has been quite sharp in her response and remarks. And I think it has given us a lot of food for thought. So I think to end, what I want to say is, first, Social Lab can bring to the table a number of things. A joint team, co-creation opportunities, building trust, enhancing communication, enhancing understanding between different sectors, where we speak different languages and we have different experiences. But perhaps Social Lab cannot tackle huge systemic issues. We can only do it bit by bit. And I'm now very energized to carry forward the Social Lab movement in Hong Kong. And the fourth lab, I want to tell you, and you see that in the program too, we are working with Sik Wan Chua, we are working with the Food and Environmental Hygiene Department to look at our public markets, to think about how to modernize our public markets. It's a very, very important issue in Hong Kong because a lot of public markets are a bit vacant. The stores are not being used. So we have identified a market as our research base, and after Chinese New Year, we are heading to that market. I urge all of you, to join in some way or another and to help us. And I hope that some of you could introduce a relevant government department to us for the 5th lab, for the 6th lab. Well, that is if Jockey Club money is forthcoming. But I'm quite sure that we can do it. So to summarize, I want to say something that I read from Facebook from a young friend, and he's here actually, but I won't name him. What he said is, social innovation, or what MaD believes in, is not about one person walking 100 steps, but it's about 100 people walking together one small step. So today we have exceeded this because we have nearly 300 people who decided to come here on a Sunday, including government departments, including NGO leaders, including all of you who really flew here from all over the world. So we have more than 100 people walking that same small step. It's much better than one person running 100 steps. When you get home and when you go back to work tomorrow, please think about today. Let's co-create. Let's co-create for a better city. Thank you.